Hello and welcome to Digital BC Livestream. Every month, we take this time to get together and talk to leaders from BC and across the world to hear from them on what they're doing to improve digital service delivery. So my name is Gen Lambert, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer for the province of BC, and I'm coming to you today from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. And I am really happy today to introduce our guest, JJ Sutherland. He is the CEO of Scrum Inc. and the co-author of best-selling books on Scrum. Prior to his work at Scrum, he was also an award-winning correspondent, producer, and bureau chief at NPR, America's national public broadcaster. And I'm a huge NPR fan, so excited to speak to JJ today for many reasons. So welcome, JJ.
Thanks, Jen.
And as usual, I'm going to start off with a couple of questions of my own, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. So audience, please get ready to add your questions to the chat, upvote other people's questions, and you can also turn on live captioning whenever you like. So JJ, my first question is about the interplay of leadership and Agile practices. So in BC, we have been growing our Agile practice over the last 6 years with the leadership of the BC Exchange Lab. And over that time, we've seen digital service delivery teams really adopt Agile and Scrum, and even some policy teams have been adopting Agile. So that's great to see. And at the same time, we've also seen that there's sometimes some challenges with leaders being able to lead in an Agile environment and finding it a bit difficult, especially as they're responsible for delivering on some pretty big government commitments. So I'm wondering if you have tips on how leaders can support themselves throughout that transition and support their teams, and as well how Agile teams can also support their leaders in delivering on those commitments and being able to speak to how we're delivering on those commitments.
Well, I think leadership is critical. Usually what happens in an Agile, adopting Agile, adopting Scrum, new ways of working, is it starts out with the teams, right? The teams start doing it, they start delivering more. But what that happens is as it bumps up and becomes more successful, all of a sudden leadership needs to be able to support them. Otherwise, it's going to be very small and not be able to deliver the kind of impact that leaders really want. And so leaders need to educate themselves about what leading an Agile organization is like, because it's different. It is empowering your teams. It is not letting your teams do whatever they want. Actually, you have more control over what they're doing. You have less control over how they're doing it. And so it's very important for leaders to realize what they're relaxing, which is the sort of micromanagement, day-to-day, sort of everything. But what they aren't relaxing is standards and quality and direction and strategy. And so really what Agile does is allows leaders to focus on what leaders really do care about, which is those things.
That makes sense. And so does that like feed in a little bit to the planning? I think that there's sometimes a feeling that Agile means no planning, but in fact, Agile means for us a lot more planning in some cases. So how would you tie those things together?
So what Agile does is it does mean more planning, because you're constantly planning as you're learning, because you're delivering value in small increments and getting feedback from whoever's getting value, from your citizen, from your customer, from your internal person, whoever is getting value from what you're doing, about are you doing the right thing? And so it's constantly informing your planning. What it doesn't do is what happens often, especially in public projects, it happens in corporations too, where at the beginning of some 5-year program, they will lay out everything that's supposed to happen every month for the next 5 years. And that's when you know the absolute least about what you're building, how you're building it. What is the technology going to look like in 5 years? As we all know, that's going to radically change. I mean, I don't know what, my tech stack has changed probably 4 times in the last 5 years. And so it's doing enough where you have a vision, you have a long-term vision, you know the effect that you want to have, but you're doing it in small increments and learning as you're going. And so it's constantly planning and replanning rather than, listen, I've seen those Gantt charts, that flow for 5 years and they're gorgeous. They are works of art. And the thing is that once they hit reality though, they don't actually reflect reality. I actually know one group, of not more than one group, who pay people to update the Gantt charts to reflect reality, like a team of like 5 people. So I've always said to this leader of this one group, not in public service or in corporation, I say, well, you're basically paying people to lie to you. Because they're saying, oh, we're going according to the plan. But the thing is that you have a plan, but then that plan needs to be rethought through and redone as you're working through it.
Mm-hmm. But you just definitely start with some kind of plan. As
well, you have to have some kind of plan, otherwise you're totally hooked.
For sure.
You have to have something.
Yeah. So I think you talked a little bit about the difference between what you see in the private sector and the public sector. Is there any other differences that you've noticed or kind of generalities that you've seen in terms of how the public service adopts Agile versus how the private sector does?
So I would say the major difference is how you define value. And it's important, I mean, it's actually much more complicated than I think than a lot of public sector think about private corporations. Is all, you know, a profit and loss statement. Like that's true and stuff, but what is the value that you're delivering? And then how do you measure how quickly you're delivering it? And that it's not terribly difficult, but it does take some thought because it's not quite as clear. So it could be, how long does it take someone to get a permit? I'm just making these up, you know, so don't do anything, you know, if I say something stupid, forgive me. You know, how long does it take someone to get something done? How long, you know, how much effort does it take a team to produce something? Is it easier? But you want to figure out a way to measure that, because what you want your teams to do is measure, are they getting better at what they're doing, at delivering that value? So you have to measure what that value is.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And I think that speaks a little bit to kind of the continuous improvement and then continuous change. And in government, we're quite used to change because we have change built into our cycles already. In terms of our election cycles. So it's something that we already deal with, and then we add on sort of the change with continuous improvement, and it gets a little bit, can get a little bit tiring sometimes to constantly have change. Is there anything that you would say that you would advise in terms of that, like how to deal with that continuous improvement as a change?
So, 2 things. One is when I deal with the public sector in particular, but this happens in the private sector too, when there's a change in leadership, you can just predict it a lot more. That's definitely going to happen in the public sector, like on a regular, like we know October this year, there's going to be an election and something's going to be different afterwards. But what I find is that people inside of the public sector need to, because often I'll see a new election come in or a new leader gets rotated in or whatever, and then they say, okay, well, let's reorganize. That's the first thing that they want to do. They want to reorganize the whole department. And so they may be in office, what, 2-4 years, it depends what kind of system you're running with, how long you're going to be in that leadership role. And so you spend your first year reorganizing the place. And then you spend your next maybe 6 months trying to get stuff done, and the final 6 months trying to get your next job. That's what I see public sector leaders having a lot. And what they're saying, listen, we have a new administration comes in, everybody changes, the policies change, and what we're focused on changes. I say, that's okay. Elections have consequences. You're there to, serve the elected representatives of the people. But what you want to do is just get a execution engine that goes really fast. So a new elected, minister or secretary or whatever can come in and say, hey, my policy is now this. This is what's important to me. This is the policies I want to carry out during my term in office. And you say, that's great, sir or ma'am, but don't worry about how we're doing it. Measure us in how well we're executing what it is. And that way, all it is, in Agile terms, just a change in backlog. It's like, oh, instead of focusing on this one set of issues that was important to the previous government, now there's some new group in power and they're focused on this other set of issues. And from, a permanent staff point of view, well, no, that doesn't matter. They're there to carry out the will of the people. And so focusing on that and the continuous improvement is how much better can you get at doing that? Because you can get a little bit better. And I'm not saying you're going to, become 20 times better overnight. You're not. But you can get a little bit better. And a lot of it is just saying, and this happens no matter what organization you're in, what kind of organization, what are the things that are slowing you down? Everyone knows what they are. If you sit down with any of your teams and say, okay, what are the things that are driving you crazy, that are slowing you down? They're going to come up with and then they're going to say, okay, Some of those we can't change because, like, it's the law. Sorry, I know that regulation is annoying, but it just is, and we're not going to change the law. But some of them, can we change this process a little bit? Is it actually the intent of that law that we have this 800-page travel policy document? Can we actually see what is the intent that we can do things more easily?
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Absolutely. And I think that really feeds into some of these questions around estimating. We've got some questions from the audience around what is the best way to estimate, and that really feeds into the continuous improvement, knowing that we are increasing our velocity and our execution engine, as you said. So we've got a question around what is the best way to predict sprint capacity? Is it points or hours? What is your experience, and what would you recommend?
I would recommend not using time because we're really bad about it. We're really bad. And the thing is, first of all, the one thing that you have to remember about all estimates is they're all wrong. 100% of estimates are wrong. And when you know the least, when you're estimating the beginning of a project, the research shows that you're usually off 400% either bigger or smaller. I mean, that's that's a huge range, right? And so what you want to do is really, well, what is the historical? And what I really recommend people to do, there you can do planning poker, you can do all these things, but just do t-shirt sizes. Okay, this thing is, we're going to pick a reference. We're going to say, okay, doing this kind of job, I don't know, we're writing a blog post. We're going to call that medium. It's always going to be medium. It doesn't matter. We know some blog posts are bigger than other blog posts, but they're pretty much the same. We're going to call it a medium. Okay, this other thing, if that's a medium, is it bigger, is it a large, is it a small, is it an extra small? And then what you do is, humans are really good at relative sizing. Is this pile of rocks bigger than that pile of rocks? We're really horrible at absolute sizing. Are there 100 pebbles in there, or are there 178? Sort of pursuit of false accuracy. Right? It's always going to be wrong. And then what you do is sort of say you're improving. It's like, okay, let's say we did 10 things last sprint, 5 mediums, 2 smalls, and 3 larges. Well, the sprint capacity will do. There's slice down, we can get 11 things done. But it's usually, and to get a little more technical, what I usually do is say, take the average of the last 3 sprints, because velocity is a pretty noisy metric. And so you want to average it out. And then if you have a team of 5 and one of the people's on vacation, well, take in 80% instead of 100% because 20% of your capacity is not working that week or 2 weeks, whatever your sprint length is. And so that's what I would do. I would try it. And there's a bunch of books. Or there's a ton of stuff online. Just try one that works for you and do it, and know that there's no one best way, and accept that it's going to be wrong. And sometimes you're going to be right, and sometimes you're going to be less right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was listening to one of your books on the weekend on audiobooks, and it was talking about the Fibonacci sequence, which I've used before in Agile, and I didn't realize that that's the reason that we use the Fibonacci is because it's easier for humans to understand the difference between 3 and 5 and 11 than 2 and 3 and 4. So I didn't realize that until I was listening to your book. It's kind of the rule of thirds and the golden mean and all of those things. So yeah, that was great to connect sort of like art together with Agile. That was a great breakthrough there. Okay, so another question that we have in the chat is, how important is a ticketing system in managing Agile projects with external dependencies? Or maybe just how important is a ticketing system at all?
It depends what you're using it for. And I know that's a really flip answer, but it's sort of, with external dependencies, what's very important is to define what those boundaries are. Because there's only so much the team can do, and then it's like, or a vendor or whatever. And so our definition of done. Our work is done when we toss it outside of our control, because it's completely outside of our control. And if we just let it say it's not done until it comes back from that vendor or other team or whatever, it's just going to sit in doing forever, right? Because who knows when they're going to get to it. It's completely outside. So you define, it's where you slice it. It's like, okay, done means we've tossed it over here. And then if someone comes to you and says, well, how come this stuff isn't done? You can say, well, look at all of these, 15 things we've done that are done as far as we can do, and we're waiting for this other group. So go talk to them, because we've done everything we can. And so a lot of it, and that really helps with leadership as well, because leadership sometimes doesn't understand the dependencies between groups. And they'll just say, well, my teams, I want this stuff because that's what I'm being. And if you can show to your leadership saying, hey, this is where the problems are. This is a huge impediment for us, but we can't fix it. This is a barrier we can't cross. Can you help us? Can you go talk to the other leader? Can you make this system? Or can we say, hey, let's model out the entire value stream, to use a term of art, like everything you need from idea to execution to get everything done? Can we make that so it's not tossing things over a wall to some other group? Can we set ourselves up that way? But making the cost of those things visible, as I would say, is what's really important. And I don't know what kind of ticketing system you're using or what you're using it for, but if you're saying, okay, we get a ticket, we got a request, we doing whatever, we get it to this point, and from our point of view, that ticket is done. We know from like the end user's point of view, it might not be done, but we've done all we can. And so we just track that. And then you can actually go to leadership and say, look at all the stuff that people are waiting on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that brings me to another question that I had, which was around silos. So if you have quite a few Agile teams, which we do now, some of them work on related products or related initiatives. How do you prevent those autonomous, self-organizing, empowered teams from becoming silos in themselves? And what are some kind of communication tactics or other kinds of tactics that you can use to support teams in aligning and communicating in a way that delivers the ultimate end goal?
Well, that's the key. Is what is the ultimate end goal, and what skill sets do you need? It's just like if you had one team. A cross-functional team has all the skill sets that are needed to get that team's work done. Now, if you're doing something really big, you're going to need a lot more teams than one team. And so the way to do it is it's in scaling up. First of all, don't scale unless you have to, because any scaling system is by nature waste, right? A perfect world, there'd be one team that could do all that stuff. So like a number of, like Amazon Web Services tries to organize itself this way. It's like each little microservice, 1 to 3 teams. And they just have the infrastructure, they have the architecture, they have all that kind of stuff, so they don't have to cross and coordinate as much as possible. That takes a lot of architectural thinking, and how and modularizing and all. So it's tricky, but that's one of the reasons I spent so many years doing that architectural work, is so they could do that. They wouldn't have to, so if you do have a group of teams, the first thing is say, okay, what's the idea? What's the output we want to have? What's the effect that we want to have? Like, what is the thing we want at the end? Okay, then work backwards. What are all the teams we need and all the skill sets we need and all the technology we need and all that kind of stuff to actually get that? And then you can say, okay, are we organized in the right way that all of those people can coordinate on either a quarterly, a monthly, a weekly, a daily basis, however often. Sometimes you really need to coordinate every day. Sometimes you don't. You need to coordinate once a quarter, especially if you're a huge organization. One public organization we're working with in the UK, it's like 40,000 people. The top 12 people do not need to coordinate every day, but they're leading 40,000 people. Once a quarter, once a month for sort of 2 levels down. But like the top level, the top 4 or 5 people, like once a quarter. Because a lot of moving pieces, and they're way. How the teams are interacting, what are the handoffs that are happening, what are the dependencies that are happening, how do we measure those that are keeping that ultimate impact, ultimate delivery in mind. And then you want to figure out, that's sort of the for Scrum Master or Scrum Team Coach. I don't know what the terminology you guys are using. Doesn't matter. And then there's sort of the prioritization of how do those priorities need to be coordinated? And that's sort of on the leadership side of things, like those top 4 or 5 people, they have big priorities. Okay, how does that go down and get, split up and chopped and sliced? So, one big priority is like, oh, we want to build a highway. I'm making this up, by the way. I have no idea how hard building a highway is. So probably hard. But basically, we want to be able to remove this amount of traffic between these 2 cities. Okay, what are we going to do? Eventually, it gets down to some guy or some person needs to get out there painting the road, right? Now, they know that they're in the trade, capabilities between these 2. I'm really going too far. But anyway, so it's how do you slice down the prioritization into what are the people actually doing tomorrow, right? And that requires coordination at the top level, but then and it requires, as you get lower down to the team, hey, this is what we're learning. We're releasing this stuff. This is what we're finding out. And this is what's getting in our way. And how does that impact your prioritization of fixing those things as a leader?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, that might be a little convoluted.
Mm-hmm. So some of that inspect and adapt, like waiting to see what the results are, seeing what the results are, and then adapting based on the results is kind of part of continuous improvement, right? That's like we prioritized incorrectly last time, so we can prioritize differently this time. And that kind of goes into one of the questions that was asked also in the chat is, what do you do about hierarchy? If you have many, many levels of hierarchy, how does that impact working in Agile? And I think what you're kind of saying is a bit about the slicing and dicing, like you slice and dice differently at each different level, and you're responsible for different kind of prioritization at different levels. Is that accurate?
Changing the law and how that's not going to change. But what you can do is change how those people talk to each other. Because I can show you 2 organizations with exactly the same org chart, exactly the same. And then I can show you what, and then that's sort of like the hardware. And then you have the software, which is how that organization acts. What are the communication pathways? Where are the decision rights? How, what needs to be checked with upper management and what can the team decide by themselves? Exact same hierarchical structure, and do those things very, very differently. Now, on the other side, I see sometimes Agile teams say, we want to have no hierarchy. And what's really interesting about this is, because I thought quite a bit about this, some of the really interesting thinking about hierarchy goes back to some of the women's movement trying to create new forms of organization in San Francisco Bay Area in the 1970s. And what they found is that the groups that said they were in zero hierarchy, there was hierarchy, it was just invisible. Because there were people in the collective who were more influential, made the decisions, and all of that was, just unseeable. And so actually, if you don't have a visible hierarchy, people, especially the least powerful people, don't know how to access it. There is no way. It's all about who knows who. It's, friendships, it's, this and that. And those never start out, intentionally being bad. But then it's like someone new comes in, or someone's from, a group that's, not in that standard, whatever kind of diversity, term you want to use. There's a lot of different ones, but that can't access it. And so you want just enough hierarchy. You want we often use the term, the minimum viable bureaucracy. You want as little as you can get away with, but it does have to be viable. And that's really, really important, because that's on terms of empowering all the people, making sure they know where their hierarchy is in terms of decision rights and prioritization. Where are those coming from? And those really need to be paid attention to, because it's not a free-for-all. And then there's also the ability to get feedback from the people who are doing the work to the people who are doing the prioritization, making sure they're as close together as possible. But walk in recognizing that humans are hierarchical creatures. Organizations are hierarchical, but how organizations talk to each other can get some of the most damaging parts of that out. It's always going to be some.
Yeah, that's great. I think while you were speaking, I was just thinking about like decision rights and how important that is for that to be transparent. Because I think a lot of the places where we've had impediments in some projects is just is not knowing who actually can approve something or who actually has the decision-making power on this, and then, you know, kind of spinning because we're not sure who to ask or who can make that decision.
Yeah.
So that's really helpful. And I know transparency is so important in Agile, and in Agile so helpful towards transparency that this is just one other aspect of transparency to consider. I think we have maybe time for one more question. So I'll just ask you the obligatory AI question. So AI is a super hot topic, as you know. How do you see it impacting Scrum and Agile practices, or as something to consider? I know you talked about the tech stack, and we can't plan for the future in terms of 5 years from now what the tech stack is. So, any more thoughts on AI and how that might impact us?
Well, obviously I have all the answers and know everything's going to happen, but I have no idea. But I you know, what I have been seeing is what some of the people I talk to call human-machine teaming, which is what is the process that the humans and the machines work together, and that process in an agile way of making sure that there is an adequate feedback loop and letting the machines do what machines are really good at. Because if what I do tell a lot of people who are team leaders or scrum masters or product owners is, if you're focused on just the mechanistic parts of that job, that is going to go away. Because mechanistic stuff, you know, how many typing pools do we have? And there's good reasons that we just don't need to waste human effort and human work in those ways. There's always going to be the need for human stuff. So one of the ways I tell the story, a few years back, Kasparov, the great Russian chess master, had an open tournament, and it could be supercomputers, it could be supercomputers plus grandmasters, it could be grandmasters, it could be any kind of connection. This is before AI. This is like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And what happened is the people who won was not the most powerful computer, or even the most powerful computer combined with the best chess player. It was 2 pretty good chess players and a couple of laptops, but their process of how they work together was better. And so it's that process of working, of transparency, of inspection, of adaptation, and using the tools to see those patterns you can't see as humans, because they're better at that. Sometimes they hallucinate, but they are better at it. So recognizing that, some teams I know are dumping all of their like recording. This is kind of weird to me. I think it's a little Big Brother-ish, but I'm not doing it. But some teams, they're actually having like an AI attend all of their events as a team member and listens and records them and then reflects back to the teams. Here's what's decided. Here's what's happening. Blah blah blah. And then even at a retrospective, it's like some of them are trying to get their Scrum tooling feeding into it. I think with mixed success. And then it's saying, hey, I'm noticing this pattern and what's getting done. What isn't?
That's super
it's
interesting.
Almost like a team member.
Mm-hmm.
I have not. I find it a little nerve-wracking, but I suppose that's because I'm an old, person who finds change scary. But no, I mean, I find it. Just personally, there's nothing to do with Agile. I do a lot of surveys and reports and interviews. I'll talk to 50 people in a large organization. Say, let's talk about how your organization is. I would say that AI saves me 3 weeks on a project like that easily. Of a 7-week project, probably cuts it in half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm kind of hearing that you're thinking like an AI computer can be our another member of our multidisciplinary team.
Yeah,
and doesn't have to eat any of the pizza. Nice.
Exactly. They're easy. They're cheap.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us today, JJ, and thank you as well to the audience for the great questions. So you will be visiting us actually at our digital office in Victoria later this month, starting April 29th.
Yes.
So call out to the audience if you're interested in connecting with JJ while he is here in town in Victoria, and we can also do some virtual things then. Please email us at digital.government@gov.bc.ca, and I believe that email address is also in the chat as well. So thanks so much, everyone, and until next time. Thanks, JJ.
Thank you, Jen. And I'm really I've never been to BC, so I'm really looking forward to going there.
It's beautiful.